Okay, we're just waiting for folks to trickle in, and we will get started in just a few moments. Okay, wonderful. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this presentation of RISE Network's recent report, Plugged In, Examining COVID-19 Enrollment Trends and Learning Outcomes. My name is Mercy Quay. I'm the founder and principal of the Narrative Project, Connecticut's only anti-racist and social justice public relations agency. We connect and communicate just missions. During this call, the TNP team will be collecting questions and engaging on social media, so please do not hesitate to ask your questions of our speakers at any time. Before we kick off today's conversation, let's cover some housekeeping. First, all participants are muted to keep the audio quality as high as possible. Second, we'll be holding space for a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. But if we run out of time, we'll be making an FAQ available at a later date at ctrise.org. Now, if for any reason we're disconnected, this video will also be made available on RISE's website. And finally, please be sure to join the conversation on social media, Twitter specifically, using hashtag RisePluggedInReport. Today, you'll be hearing from RISE Executive Director Emily Palin and Applied Research and Data Strategist Dr. Stephanie Fakerzadeh. We'll also be hearing from Principal Matt Ryan of East Hartford High School and Superintendent Dr. Michael Connor of Middletown Public Schools. Again, please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen at any time to ask our speakers your questions. And again, thank you for joining us. Without further delay, Emily Palin.
Good morning, and thank you, Mercy. Thank you for joining us for the release of this new report titled Plugged In, Examining COVID-19 Enrollment Trends and Learning Outcomes. Again, my name is Emily Palin. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut RISE Network. We really appreciate your time this morning as we share important research and recommendations in response to student enrollment and learning data amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. We recognize that navigating the pandemic is incredibly challenging for students, families, and educators. And this also cannot be viewed as a lost school year. We must work together to embrace creative strategies that respond to the data, educator expertise, student experiences, and family perspectives. Students are experiencing higher rates of disengagement and course failure this year, both in Connecticut and across the country. And this report calls attention to issues and offers recommendations around how to move forward and promote student success. I'd like to start by summarizing our structure for this morning's session once again. So we'll begin with a short presentation to highlight some of the key findings, implications, and recommendations, which are outlined in greater detail in the report. Then we'll engage two of our terrific RISE partners, East Hartford High School Principal Matt Ryan and Middletown Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Michael Connor, in a facilitated discussion around frontline experiences in Connecticut schools and districts. Finally, we'll welcome your questions. During the presentation, as Mercy mentioned, please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A feature, and we'll answer those at the end of this session or through a follow-up FAQ. To start, we want to provide a brief introduction to the Connecticut RISE Network. We are a nonprofit organization that partners with Connecticut high school communities to ensure all students experience success in and beyond high school. We have the privilege of collaborating with and learning from educators across 9 different districts and 10 partner high schools. We are a learning and improvement network, which means we use secure data and research methods to understand how we can better meet the needs of our students, families, and educators. The report we're sharing today centers around our student outcome goals as an organization, as well as our commitments to educational and racial equity and supporting historically marginalized communities who are particularly hard hit by the pandemic. Importantly, this report is not meant to simply name problems and identify challenges. Through offering near real-time data, we have the opportunity to adjust and ensure all students have ample opportunities to succeed, regardless of the remote or hybrid learning models they choose. As we approach the 1-year mark when schools first closed in response to the pandemic, It's important to remember that details have rapidly developed and evolved over the past 11 months. Communities are working hard to respond to new information and prioritize health and safety concerns, as well as student learning needs. To illustrate the rapid shifts, this slide summarizes key experiences this past year. Last year, the onset of the pandemic forced schools to close and embrace remote instruction for the final third of the 2019-20 school year. In late June, districts were asked to develop reopening plans. Guidance evolved to factor in the option that families would have to return to in-person instruction or continue remote learning. Districts had just 1 month to prepare plans for 2 fundamentally new school models. Then, districts had just 1 month to prepare to fully launch these new school models. So now, as we enter the second half of the 2020-21 school year, we want to take a moment to step back, to understand families' enrollment decisions and students' learning experiences so far this school year. To walk you through some of our research methods and key findings, please let me introduce Dr. Stephanie Fakarozada, our applied research and data strategist here at RISE.
Thanks, Emily. So we were motivated by 4 key questions for this research report. The first being understanding which families chose hybrid and remote learning models this year. Second, are there relationships between hybrid and remote enrollment and students' demographic, past attendance, and past academic achievement? Third, what are the relationships between hybrid and remote participation and students' initial academic outcomes during the first marking period? And lastly, how are families and students experiencing the remote and hybrid learning so far this year? This next slide summarizes our research methods. We use 2 forms of data. First, we analyzed student data for over 12,000 high school students across 8 districts and 9 high schools. RISE partners with teachers, counselors, and administrators to understand what information educators need to support and advance student learning and achievement. RISE maintains robust data sharing agreements with our partner districts, which allows us to conduct research and analysis in support of our shared student outcome goals. Importantly, the report provides aggregate data, keeping all student information completely anonymous and secure. This report presents findings from both descriptive and multi-level logistic regression analyses. And then second, we supplemented our quantitative findings with family voices. We asked families to complete a voluntary and confidential online survey. We got 52 responses, and this added important perspectives and experiences to our data. So here are some of our key findings. Connecticut families in the districts included in this report had the choice of pursuing either hybrid learning, which had some in-person instruction, or remote learning, which consisted of entirely online instruction. And so in our sample, we had 63% of students engage in hybrid learning at the end of the first marking period, and 37% of students, more than 1 in 3, engaged in remote instruction. This breakdown is fairly consistent with statewide trends, where a significant number of families are choosing remote learning, particularly at the beginning of the year. So how do these enrollment choices, hybrid or remote, vary by subgroup and past performance? In our data set, certain subgroups were more likely to choose hybrid instruction when controlling for other factors. So we saw male students, white students, and English language learners were more likely to enroll in hybrid learning with some in-person instruction. Other subgroups showed higher participation in remote learning. Female students, students of color, and special education students were more likely to enroll in remote instruction with completely online learning. Additionally, students with prior attendance concerns, so those who had been previously chronically absent, were more likely to enroll in remote learning. Interestingly, there were no significant relationships between prior year on-track status and remote or hybrid learning choices. On-track status tells us whether students are passing enough classes to promote to the next grade level, and I'll be discussing that more in the next section. So in terms of the qualitative insights, the quantitative enrollment data offers us with some trends, but they don't tell us the whole story. So the family survey gave additional insights around these complex enrollment decisions. Looking first at responses from families that chose hybrid learning, most identified student engagement and social emotional benefits as the primary drivers for wanting some in-person instruction. The parent who was quoted here explained, "My son is a visual learner. He was having lots of issues with remote education, and he presented lots of emotional issues last school year after COVID-19 began. My son needs the social interaction with professors and peers in a physical setting." Now we can take a look at responses from families that chose remote learning. Of those families, 100% cited health concerns as a top reason that they selected remote learning. The second most common reason was family circumstances. For example, a family might have a younger child at home and need older child supervision. Here too, the quotes offered important insights. The first is from a parent with 3 children in 3 different schools, and they feared having the need to quarantine as a result of school cases and how that might affect their ability to work and support their family. The second shows that the remote setting can remove some of the negative social impacts of in-person instruction. So there may be some potential benefits of the remote format for some students. After understanding our enrollment trends and some of the factors that informed family decisions, we wanted to better understand student achievement so far this year, particularly in the first quarter of the school year. As an organization and network of schools, we talk a lot about on-track rates, mainly because 9th grade on-track status is one of the best predictors of on-time graduation, as cited by research from the University of Chicago. So on-track students are passing enough classes to promote to the next grade level. Off-track students are not passing enough courses, and that would put them at risk of being retained or not graduating on time. So again, we're talking about quarter 1 grades so far. So this is, are they passing enough courses during that quarter? Overall, like many schools and districts around the state and country, we're seeing lower overall on-track rates this year, and we can infer that this is related to the pandemic. But how do these on-track rates compare for hybrid and remote students? The gap is significant. So in our sample, we found that 74% of hybrid students were on track at the end of the first quarter. By contrast, only 54% of remote students were on track at the end of the first quarter. So in other words, only about half of the students enrolled in remote learning were passing enough classes at that point in time to be considered on track to be considered on track for the school year at that point in time. After controlling for demographics and prior performance, that pattern held. So remote learners had 60% lower odds of being on track than hybrid learners. Importantly, the data alone do not indicate that remote learning can't work, only that it requires more resources and development to ensure it can work for all students. Some subgroup gaps in on-track status after controlling for remote hybrid status persisted, meaning that equity gaps are still a concern for remote and hybrid learning. Here we also see that the family survey offered important insights. When asked if their child enjoys school less this year, we actually saw that hybrid families skewed more negatively, with 71% saying that their child enjoys school less. And when asked if their child struggles more this year compared to prior years, hybrid families again skewed more negatively, with 43% saying that their child struggled more this year. So I do want to reiterate that this is a small and voluntary sample in terms of the survey, so the conclusions we can draw are limited. But an important takeaway here would be that hybrid students are struggling with new learning formats as well, not just remote students. These parent quotes paint an important picture. One parent explains, "Yes, my children's grades have dropped. Their independent work completion is down, and their general care about schoolwork and classes is minimal. They miss the building and being with people and having a routine." Another parent explains that their child can't keep up with assignments and that the caliber of online instruction is not the same as in person. A parent of an English language learner expressed frustration that although their child was enrolled in hybrid learning, he can't get answers to his questions when he's doing online learning as easily. And lastly, a parent concluded that the learning quality is less and their child has lost out on learning so far this year.
Steph, thanks for that great overview of the research methods and key findings. So slide 15 summarizes those key findings again. So a significant number of families chose remote learning, more than a third. Remote learning is a compelling option for many families and students and will likely continue to be this spring. Female students, students of color, and special education students were more likely to enroll in remote instruction. And though there was no connection to passed on track status, students with prior chronic absenteeism were more likely to enroll in remote learning. There also was a distinct difference in academic performance between students enrolled in remote versus hybrid learning. 54% of remote students were on track versus 74% of hybrid students at the end of the first marking period. And taken together, these data create concerns about widening opportunity gaps for some historically marginalized populations that require our action. So the research points to several ways communities can come together to better navigate such a complex school year. The report concludes with recommendations for district leaders, policymakers, educators, students, and families. And we're excited to share promising practices from across the RISE network. One theme we want to underscore is the importance of approaching these shared challenges with humility and curiosity. No one stakeholder holds all of the information or solutions. And by continuing to learn from one another, school communities will be better positioned to achieve the shared goal of improved student outcomes. So let's dig into a few of the ideas for district leaders and policymakers. As schools enter the second half of the school year and prepare for next school year, policymakers must align resources to needs. Additional K-12 funding from the CARES Act and COVID relief package cannot bridge the gaps around new and unmet needs. Assuming equal distribution, these one-time federal funding infusions offer less than $900 per student across the country, which just barely covers the cost of a laptop. Districts face new costs in the areas of staffing, sub-coverage, PPE, technology hotspots, staff, professional development, online learning packages, furnitures, new facilities adjustments, and more. Additionally, resources must align to student needs. For example, if 40% of students are pursuing the remote learning model and leaders are seeing that remote learners are struggling relative to their peers, we must align resources to meet those needs. Related, we must continue to translate equity from talk into action. We should be concerned about how COVID-19 stands to exacerbate opportunity gaps. And rather than naming a commitment to equity, policies must reinforce those ideals. As an example, partners across the RISE network are discussing equitable grading practices and giving students multiple opportunities to demonstrate mastery and skill development. Now let's turn to ideas for educators. It's important for educators to meet students and families where they are. For example, grade 9 educators at Middletown High School use their asynchronous Wednesdays to engage families in porch visits. They target students who may be disengaged or struggling academically and engage families in conversations to work through barriers. Similarly, educators at West Hill High School in Stamford conduct more frequent home visits this year, including by leaving door tags with resources to help students navigate obstacles and reconnect to school. Educators are also coming together to design creative and innovative supplemental programs to offer students second chances and targeted support. For example, Maloney and Platt High Schools in Meriden invite students to participate in Get It Done Saturday sessions. Teachers across content areas work with students in smaller settings, provide one-on-one support, helping students to develop plans to get back on track. Many remote students have also taken advantage of these in-person Saturday sessions. Lastly, we encourage educators to remember that tomorrow is another day. National polls suggest that educator morale has reached new lows during the pandemic. And we've spoken with dozens of educators who feel exhausted and defeated. We know you are working harder than ever before. Educators must give themselves permission to take risks, make mistakes, and not sweat the small stuff. And finally, let's explore opportunities for students and families. We encourage families and students to use all available resources. School and district staff are doing their best to monitor needs and offer new programs in response to those needs. For example, Hartford Public Schools has organized remote learning hubs where students can go to community facilities even when schools may be closed. And students can also take advantage of free virtual tutoring on weeknights and Saturdays. We also want students to focus on their goals and celebrate their progress. It can be helpful for students to identify daily or weekly goals in pursuit of those longer-term aspirations of, for example, college enrollment. Related, students must take time to celebrate progress. For example, last spring, we saw students organize online senior signing day social media campaigns to recognize the accomplishments of their peers who had enrolled in college and other post-secondary programs. These accomplishments are in no way diminished by the pandemic. In fact, they are all the more impressive. And by continuing to focus on goals and celebrating progress towards these goals, we are confident that all students will thrive and succeed. Now that we've concluded our presentation, I am very excited to welcome two of our tremendous RISE Network partners into this conversation. So Matt Ryan serves as the principal of East Hartford High School, and Dr. Michael Connor serves as the superintendent of Middletown Public Schools. Both Matt and Dr. Connor have served as Connecticut teachers and administrators for decades, and I cannot think of two better people to help contextualize this report a bit more by sharing some of what they are seeing and experiencing on the ground. So Matt and Dr. Connor, I'd invite you to pull up your video, fantastic. And I'd love to start with the same question of both of you. So we just walked through some of the research and key findings outlined in this report. So would love to hear from both of you. What is something that stands out to you from the report? How do you think that this research will inform your thinking moving forward? And Principal Ryan, I'll start with you.
I got nervous there for a second. I wasn't sure my mic was going to go on. Yeah, so when I reviewed the report, and again, thank you for having me join you today. When I reviewed the report, I still was taken back by the data that talked about special ed students choosing to be remote. So that's something that we've been working really hard at, trying to get our special ed students in the building. Our 4 self-contained classrooms have been in the building every day since the beginning of school. But now, since the second semester started, we started a new program called Everyday Learners. And we targeted other special ed students that need to be in the building every day. Obviously, that's a parent choice, an agreement, but we make sure our cohorts are safe, and we bring in these other learners that need to be in the building every day. There's limited structure at home. And additionally, you need to have these students who need more, they need to be able to get more. And the only way we can do that is having them inside the building.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate you underscoring that point around equity, that we need to meet students where they are and make sure that they receive what they need. Dr. Connor, what about for you? What stands out in the report? How do you see this informing the work in your district moving forward?
Yeah, good morning. I should say almost good afternoon, Emily. Great to see you again, Mr. Ryan. I think one thing that was really compelling was, again, Stephanie gave a really compelling and resonating analysis holistically of the different regressional models that were presented in the data. But one thing that's stark is the on track versus students that are not on track. And that right there really highlights the disparities in the context of equity and how we can be able to design specific models, specifically at the high school level, with regards to ensuring that students have an equitable experience. We know that the pandemic has exacerbated the inequities. More importantly, going deeper, agnostically, the anti-marginalization or marginalization that we see now, focusing on anti-marginalization strategies that we need to employ. But specifically, to underpin what Principal Ryan was stating is the kids that really need those supports really need to be in school. And, having those students elect for a remote learning experience really is just kind of compounding some of the quandaries, educational quandaries, academic quandaries that we really need to curtail. So it's not just becomes learning loss and achievement gap, it becomes, social emotional learning, mental health components as well. So I think that, on track versus disengaged, and really those stark differences between both of those two metrics really informs us how do we get that down in Middletown Public Schools and really start addressing that. And those porch visits on Wednesdays have been really helpful with that partnership, Emily. So, I think that if we could continue that and then extend on specific strategies for re-engaging those students will really be significant for Middletown Public Schools.
Thank you, Dr. Connor. And I agree that definitely some stark differences in the on-track rates for our remote and hybrid students. And I appreciate you also naming there isn't, unfortunately, a silver bullet to help to even some of those gaps. Matt, you alluded to this before. The data are not new to you and your team. You've been looking at the data all year long. So I'm curious if you could walk us through one adjustment that your school has made going into the second half of the school year that's informed by some of the data that you've been looking at as a team.
Yeah, the biggest concern that we've had is when we started the school year, we were hybrid, A day, B day, but on your asynchronous learning day, our students are at home, supposedly supposed to access their learning through Google Classroom, but not necessarily on with the teacher. And so we saw that we weren't in control, right, of their home and what was happening. And so the second semester, what we did was we all went concurrent teaching. So on your day where you're not in the building, you're still live on the camera with the teacher. And that offered a little bit more control and expectations for the students at home. So that move from asynchronous to concurrent was the biggest move we made from first semester to second semester. We're hoping as we look at the data right now, we're still, too many kids are off track, but that's where we have our daily attendance team. We moved them to more of like a daily engagement team. So now we're doing wake up calls. We have more visits going out every single day to houses, really just trying to connect with these kids and their families so they can log in, become engaged, and then start to either become more engaged and learn, or we find out what their needs are. And that's where we started our Everyday Learner program as well this semester. Because some kids, even if they were concurrent teaching and learning, that's not good enough for them. We need to get them inside the building and get an adult monitoring them, because some of the kids are at home alone. Parents have to go to work. So the 14-year-old, 15-year-old is staying home alone, and they may not be making the best choices. So we need to get an adult to monitor them and make sure they get online.
Yeah. Matt, thanks for underscoring the importance of just being nimble and ready to adapt all year long. And I know that has been sort of the name of the game for both of you as school and systems leaders. And I also appreciate you sharing some nuggets of really actionable practices that other schools could take and borrow. We really hope that this report is not just about saying, here's the data, but okay, now what do we do with this information? So Dr. Connor, a similar question for you. You oversee a district, a school system. So what is one adjustment that your district has made going into the second semester?
Improving the model of distance learning, right? And one of the things, I mean, you highlighted it, Emily, with regards to being agile, right? And I look at this as kind of like this imperfect prototype of trying to improve some of the modular elements that are within the system, but speaking focused on improving the distance learning environment. That's one thing that I've charged my team, looking at that model, refining it to see how we can strengthen it, whether it be from a differentiated standpoint to ensure that we're underscoring some of these blended learning elements, but now really having the conversation to create the common lexicon around what is this environment going to look like? Because again, this is this prototype that's just going to keep on getting disrupted strategically. And then also really ensuring that the level of flexibility and agility is within our practitioners and our leaders. Obviously, feedback is important, right? Being customer centric and problem centric is something that we're really focused on in Middletown Public Schools. So, one thing that we're moving forward, and we've been having collective discussions with all stakeholders so that are involved in this process of co-creation, is enhancing what the distance learning model will look like so we can get students re-engaged. That's one of the things for the engagement strategy, but more importantly, so that they have high quality learning experiences despite being in a full distance learning environment.
I've appreciated so far that both of you have stayed so solutions oriented. So you've already spoken a little bit to my next question, but I'm curious to hear from either of you. Is there a bright spot that stands out to you from your school or district? How have you seen educators, families, students coming together, working creatively to promote student success? So either of you, if you want to jump in.
Sure, I'll jump in. Mr. Ryan had the wait time, so you. You know what? I call myself an outlier, right? Because I look at this as an opportunity to holistically reimagine education, to re-engineer what education looked like based off of this incumbent model that we have been employing that has been monolithic and only really geared towards um, not creating an equitable environment for students, I should say, especially when we look at the achievement gap, when we look at the proxy of graduation rates, segregated environments. This is an opportunity now to really have that disruptive innovation process where now we can leverage the environment to create equitable solutions for our students. We can really start personalizing learning for our students. We can really start looking at students as an individual. Some of the traditional practices that have become static, we can really challenge the A through F grading system, age graded classrooms. All of this in this pandemic is challenged right now. And now we can actually look at creating anti-marginalization curriculum, infusing culturally responsive pedagogy, being more culturally contextual in regards to change management theory and organization theory. So we can really, this is the permission to innovate, the permission to disrupt for our students. So yes, we're going to continue to improve the environment of Middletown Public Schools, but looking at this from a broad sense, there's so much opportunity as we start looking at strategies on how we move in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I love that theme of looking forward and how do we emerge from this even stronger. Thank you for that. Principal Ryan, we're going to let you have the last word. So feel free to share a bright spot that's resonating with you from your school community. How have you seen folks working together, thinking creatively to help promote student success?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we were talking last week, and our week was, broken up. We had a professional development day, then we were in school, then we had 2 days of remote learning because we're not doing any snow days anymore. So one of those things is, very simply is we are constantly changing our model and we are constantly implementing new ideas because we have to. And so that's something like that the pandemic requires you to do. Not even just encourage, you have to do something new. So we have one-to-one. Our school now is a one-to-one. So for the last 10 years, right, in September, I've put in to get laptops for all of our kids. And then the budget comes through, and that's the first item that's crossed off the budget. So thankfully for Connecticut Partnership and the Dalio Foundation, right, and the pandemic, we now have laptops for all of our kids. And so now our model changes and we have to have professional development for our teachers, but that's something that we now have. But I think one of my biggest bright spots is we have over 90% attendance every day. So our kids are coming online, they are coming to school, they are engaged. And our teachers are building phenomenal relationships, even through a computer. So I think the things we always kind of pride ourselves on at East Hartford, which is our relationships with our kids, we are continuing to do, even though we feel like we're struggling, we are successful. And so it's, my job, an administrator's job to find those successes and kind of highlight those for our staff because they are overwhelmed and they feel very stressed out. But if we can highlight these little wins for them, they'll feel better about waking up every day and meeting the needs of the kids.
Right. And like you said, Matt, it's about giving that permission to redefine what success looks like this year. And I appreciate you underscoring just the resiliency and perseverance of your students and of your faculty in this moment. So Principal Ryan, Superintendent Connor, thank you so much. And we'll ask you to stay on the line because we'll be opening up for some questions in just a minute. But I so appreciate you bringing so many of the themes in the report in text to life. Really, it's invaluable to hear perspectives from the front line in schools and districts in the state. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Mercy for any questions that we've received so far in this session.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emily. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A feature, and I will just start from the top. And Emily, you can feel free to kick it over to whomever to answer. So the first question we have is, which of the RISE partner schools did or did not participate? And the only thing that I'll add to that, Emily, is if you can add some color and context on why.
Yep, absolutely. And Steph, feel free to chime in too, as I miss details. So the only district partnership that's not reflected here is New Haven Public Schools. And the reason that they're omitted from the key research questions and analysis that we presented today is because their high schools have been fully remote since the start of the school year. So families did not have that hybrid remote choice. Therefore, it was not comparable to the other schools and districts that are included.
Stephanie, did you have anything to add there? I think that was a full answer.
Nope, you got it.
Okay, wonderful. So the next question was, what was the data collection periods in matter of months?
Steph, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So it's the first quarter of the academic year for each district, which varies slightly, the dates that the quarter closed, but about 2.5 months, 2 to 2.5 months.
And we are really interested to follow up on the data because, as you heard Principal Ryan and Superintendent Connor speaking about, teams have been deeply immersed in the data all year long and are taking a lot of creative measures to help get students back on track. So we will be continuing to follow the data and also sharing what we're learning and seeing beyond the RISE network.
Particularly around incomplete data, incomplete assignments, that if students have the chance to go back and complete assignments from the first quarter, that, you know, hopefully would help them.
Great, wonderful. So the next question here, and Emily, I'm going to throw this your way, is how concerned is RISE about the governor's budget flattening the ECS funding, and how will this impact districts and students?
Yep, so we will not get into the specifics about the budget proposal because that was not the deep research that we looked into. But I think we underscored a number of times in the report as well as in this presentation that as we are seeing new needs emerge, resources must align to student needs. We are seeing that our remote students in particular are struggling relative to their peers. And an important headline from this report is not that remote learning does not work. It just requires more planning, more resources to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students. So resources are part of the equation, but that continued school community effort to creatively innovate is also crucial here.
Wonderful, thank you. And so why weren't economic markers included in the report?
So as an organization, we do not use free and reduced lunch indicators in our data set, given that those data are used for specific purposes around subsidized meals that students can receive. And all of the districts that we partner with are alliance districts. So they're all high need districts, most of which do the school-wide free and reduced lunch.
Wonderful, thank you. And then this next question here is, what is the total of at-risk youth not to advance, and how do these numbers compare to non-pandemic years?
Steph, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, and for exact numbers, we'll go to the FAQ to make sure we get that exactly right. But we have been seeing about 67% of students across the board being on track for the Q1, again, meaning that they're at that time passing enough classes to promote if it were the end of the school year. And so this is down quite a bit from previous years when we were more in around 85%. So this is down quite a bit. But as I mentioned before, we're already seeing that with the opportunities of students to make up some of those incomplete assignments, we're hopeful that those numbers will continue to go up and that it's not necessarily saying that those students will be retained at the end of the year. That's one of the calls for this report, is that we want to make sure we're working with students to get them back on track before the actual promotion time.
Wonderful, thank you. And that actually leads into this next question. And it says, it's almost March. How effective can any changes in programs be before the end of the school year? What are the programs that are needed to help catch up these students and this summer, or in what everyone hopes will be a more normal school year in the fall?
I would love to hear Principal Ryan and Dr. Connor's thoughts on this, but something that I want to underscore that I know has been a steady sort of drumbeat in our messaging today and in the report is that this cannot be viewed as a lost school year. Yes, we are more than halfway through this school year, but I think as you heard our school and district leaders so eloquently say a moment ago, there are still steps that we can take to help students get back on track, think creatively about summer programming, think about pivots for next year. This is not a lost school year. We must work together as school communities to think about adjustments for the second half of the year. Dr. Connor, Principal Ryan, thoughts on that question? Dr. Connor, you're getting the...
Wow, Mr. Ryan, I can't wait to tell Mr. Quinnell how you've been picking on me. I think that this is an opportunity. Again, what Emily stated is absolutely correct. This is not a gap year. We have to continue. I mean, if we look at it as a gap year, learning loss of learning gains, achievement gaps, even the excellence gaps, what a lot we haven't really been focusing on. Preparation gap, the myriad of different gaps that are underpinned in education will continue to exacerbate. I think we have to be creative and have this level of this disruptive, innovative mindset on how we can be creative to, whether it be augment the instructional model, be able to differentiate, build the capacity and the lexicon of our practitioners to differentiate. So they're providing the inter-tiered interventions as well as providing the service of tier 1 to our students as well. And then also looking at time in the summer, where time is going to be the essential variable to be able to accelerate and recover with our students. As you know, most districts throughout the country have received the ESSER II funds, and that's the time to be able to build those systems for recovery and acceleration and to ensure we get our high vulnerable students that need to come in, that needs that extra time, that really copious instruction to be able to mitigate those gaps. Because again, this is not a lost year, okay? It was a different year. I like to phrase that to everybody, where we had to be able to be agile and had to make on-time adjustments with that. But again, if we look at it as a lost year, then you know the services that we're providing our students are compromised. So yeah, absolutely. To be able to continue to expand this is one of the great creative opportunities that we have in education today.
Matt, I know you gave the floor for Dr. Connor, but I'm curious if you have thoughts that you wanted to expand upon around, it's March, what can we really do?
Yeah, we're riding into March, but I think there's two factors, which is you have to maximize time. And so there's only so much time in the day. So you have to put in place afternoon and evening sessions for kids, Saturday sessions for kids. And then you have to focus on making sure that your summer utilizes all of the time necessary. Whether you are a 12th grader going to college, we have to support that 12th grader all the way into August. Whether you are an 8th grader, we have to have multiple programs for the 8th grade rising 9th graders coming into East Hartford High School to make sure they're ready to start 9th grade on point. And then we have to use our time throughout the spring in planning and making sure our intervention programs are set, ready to go for the fall, to make sure we support our students. You have to have Algebra 1 ready to go, and you have to support Algebra 1 ready to go in August.
Wonderful, thanks so much. And so we have time for maybe one more question, Emily. So the question I'll grab here is, how do you keep remote students engaged who may have suffered from prior chronic absenteeism, even with a computer?
Yeah, so again, I'll be curious to hear if other folks want to chime in on this. I look at that data both from an optimistic place and some slight concern. Optimistically, we have, I think, some students who are indicating to us that the historic school model did not really work for them. And the choice of remote learning may be a better fit. So we need to continue to explore that. To Dr. Connor's point, like post-pandemic, what are the implications here? The concerning piece, absolutely, that I think is a part of that question is, are students with a history of chronic absenteeism becoming more disengaged? And that's where I think Principal Ryan was just speaking to us a moment ago. that connections are so crucial, whether that is through a computer screen or in person during those precious hours when students are in person. Those connections cannot be understated. And you heard some of the examples of ways in which educators are going out to meet with families and students in their local communities to help understand what are those barriers to connecting, how can we work together? We know this is really hard. Curious if other folks have thoughts on the chronic absenteeism piece.
With chronic absenteeism, I think it really comes down to you have to have a system where you're collecting the data, then your data turns into a data point. Now you dig down deep into the student and you have to know the student's story. And the only way to do that is to develop a relationship, whether it's over a phone, on a computer, or a home visit. And then that has to be constant. And then that has to be your daily system. You have to keep reaching out to the students. You have to build a relationship. And that's where our support staff has been doing a phenomenal job this year of finding out each student's story and then intervening.
Ditto. I mean, disaggregating the data and segmenting the data to identify the individual needs of the students, and then partnerships like we have with the RISE Network, and being able to identify a multitude of differentiated strategies to get to the students and families' needs and really get them re-engaged within our school systems. But you're right, Mr. Ryan, analyzing the data and unwrapping it and asking those really deep, descriptive and prescriptive questions about the students to have a foundational understanding to employ your next steps.
Wonderful. And actually, Stephanie, can I just ask you to clarify one question we came in from an earlier question? From what month to what month was the data collected?
So we collect the data directly from the school districts. And so if the school district started in August or September, whenever their start date was, it began then. And then the academic quarters ended in either October or November, depending on the school district.
Wonderful. Thank you so
And
much.
Steph, that family survey was administered November, December, is that right?
Yes, in December.
Great, thanks.
That's right. Okay. And for the rest of the questions that we did not get to, we will be wrapping those up in an FAQ. And with that, I'll pass it back over to you, Emily.
Great. So as we wrap up today, I again want to thank everyone for joining us for this important discussion. In particular, I have to thank Principal Ryan, Superintendent Connor, Dr. Fakarozada, and Liza Van Gundy, the other author of this report. And as you heard our speaker's name, also just want to acknowledge the incredible resiliency and perseverance of students, families, and educators across the state. Much of the reporting this past year associated with the pandemic has struck a somber tone. And as a nonprofit organization and network of Connecticut schools, we are committed to supporting learning, improvement, and excellent student outcomes. The pandemic is certainly having a profound effect on teaching and learning, particularly for our most vulnerable populations. And in preparing this report, we wanted to strike a solutions-oriented tone. By sharing mid-year data, we have the opportunity to highlight what's working and what's not, and to spotlight promising practices from schools, classrooms, and remote settings across the state. And we must work together as school communities and across school communities to embrace creative ideas that honor family perspectives, student needs, and educator expertise. So I'll turn things over to you, Mercy, for some final housekeeping.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emily. And so that folks aren't getting a disembodied voice, I'm just going to hop back on here for a moment and just say thank you again for joining us for this conversation. Again, if you have any further questions for our speakers, please feel free to email media@narrative-project.com. We are going to drop that email into the chat so that you have that. This recording, as well as the report, will be made available in full at ctrise.org, and any additional questions will be added to the FAQ on RISE's website. This has been a presentation of RISE Network's report, Plugged In, examining COVID-19 enrollment trends and learning outcomes. Thank you again for joining us.